more of a side effect of COVID and the fact that people are really concerned about how the Pac-12 is handling this, or is it just kind of a one-off?
Yeah, so I mean, that first day, it seemed like Wazoo handled things pretty poorly. And, you know, it's hard to know exactly what they were really trying to accomplish to kind of backtrack their stance and let the guy, you know, stay on the team. But there's initially reports that they were, like, trying to kick people off and not let them be part of the program at all anymore if they joined the movement. But I think, like, the PR backlash being so big, I think that teams realized that they needed to just support the players, at least publicly, and kind of go about it that way, because it always be a PR disaster like what happened to Wazoo. So, you know, I think that a lot of admin people are probably pretty nervous about it all and how to accomplish getting to a point that they can, you know, have the players be satisfied and compete this year, but also not give up too much financially.
And with that, the Pac-12, I mean, obviously it can hold its own. A school like USC could easily just be its own school, its own independent thing. But if you look at something like the Mountain West, you know, they've always kind of just been like the little brother to the Pac-12, even though a lot of those teams have beaten up on the Pac-12 in past years. Where does this pandemic and their season, with the number of games they're going to be forced to cut, and you know, what does that bode for them in the future?
Well, you know, with all this stuff going on, I feel like kind of becoming, eventually when it comes down to like paying players, you know, like the smaller schools aren't going to have the money to keep up that kind of spending and afford to pay players. That's what it comes to, number one. But then even short term, like this year with, you know, the Mountain West not getting those bye games with the Pac-12, which gives them a pretty big chunk of change. You know, a lot of times they'll make like $500 to $1.5 million to play a Pac-12 team. You know, that's definitely going to hurt them financially. You know, they also don't have like the money, you know, built up the way that a Power 5 team would have. The lack of attendance for them is going to hurt pretty bad. I mean, it's going to hurt everyone, but I think that, yeah, the smaller schools and conferences are going to take this a lot worse than the big schools.
Like with Boise State, they had to cancel their whole baseball program, and they're scrambling with the Olympic sports. And I know, like with at least in the Pac-12 with gymnastics, I think Arizona State, like their whole team just redshirted. So as far as people transferring, because some states are open and letting people play football, where do you see that affects recruiting?
To quickly touch on the sports being canceled, I think that's definitely going to be a side effect of all of this going on with COVID. I think a lot of universities are going to evaluate those programs, and if they're really necessary, you know, most of them, of the Olympic sports, are kind of money drains to these schools. And when you're trying to tighten up a budget, you know, that's going to be the first place they're looking at to cut expenses. And then in regards to recruiting, yeah, it's interesting because, you know, certain states aren't playing high school football, and then you have those kids going to other states like Georgia. I think USC today, right, their quarterback went to
Jake Garcia.
I think it was him that was going to go to, yeah, he's going to go to Georgia, right, to play high school football.
Yep,
so,
4 years and 4 high schools.
Yeah, so, and I feel like the problem with that for the Pac-12 is that, like, you know, once he's exposed to being in Georgia, you know, there's a chance that you just don't come back to the West Coast. You choose a new school on the East Coast. So I think that's the risk the Pac-12 could run if those kids do leave for other states. So hopefully it doesn't happen. But no, and they'll stay with the Pac-12 schools, but it kind of does open up that bag of worms.
You know, for so long, it's kind of been talked about how maybe the Pac-12 and Mountain West are kind of second tier, and maybe some of that is regional bias. You know, people don't always stay up late for those Pacific time games. So I'm just curious, like, you know, whether it's this year with players who may or may not opt out, or, you know, future seasons where recruits aren't having their senior year and they're going to lose a year of development. Can the Pac-12, Mountain West, can these conferences afford to put out a lesser product? Or, should they sort of pause until everything's back in order and they can put out the best product?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that they're going to want to play this season regardless because of the financial implications. I think that they need to get that TV revenue.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, their first priority. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, too, because, the Pac-12 is not playing any non-conference games. And without that, the conference, already isn't getting that much respect nationally a lot of times. And if they don't play any non-conference games, it's almost hard to see, what happens if Oregon or USC goes 9-1 or 10-0. But there's other undefeated teams around the nation. Will they get a shot at the playoff? Who knows? I don't know if they've earned that respect nationally. And so without playing non-conference games this year, that could be an issue when it comes to playoff time.
They need to give you a vote. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Need more votes on the West Coast.
Yeah, for sure.
And with that, I actually have had a solution to the Mountain West and the Pac-12's problem, at least for West Coast bias, because I will say this. Christian McCaffrey should have won the Heisman over Derrick Henry. But it's Stanford, it's the West Coast, and even you can go back to Reggie Bush when he won the Heisman. People said Vince should have won it. No, Vince played in the soft Big 12, and Reggie was literally putting USC on his back every week. But, side point, I had a concept that I think the Pac-12 should just merge with the Mountain West, at least for football, in some cases basketball, and, the other teams like the Big West, wherever they fit in, they fit in. But I would say you could just call it the Pacific Coast Conference and just have all these West Coast teams, all these the Mountain West, Hawaii, just the whole West Coast in one conference. They're all playing each other. Let's say it's 16 teams, whatever, hell, 20 teams even. And you literally have a power structure set up where it's not just, it's a conference. No, it's a whole coast that you can't ignore anymore. Do you think maybe, had this whole pandemic not gone down, or maybe that might be the future because things are going to start to become regional, especially if you're not playing non-conference? Do you see a future where somehow the Pac-12 and the Mountain West might possibly merge?
It's definitely an interesting thought because it could, give them.
He's been pitching this idea for a solid decade. But go ahead, Zach.
What was that? I missed that last part.
He's been pitching this idea for a solid decade.
Larry Scott going wish he.
But go ahead.
I don't know. I think it's tough to say because I actually think that college football is kind of going towards a place of just. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being just 35 to 40 Power 5 teams eventually, and schools like Wazoo and Oregon State are actually more relegated down to the Mountain West type level, rather than bringing up the small schools to the Pac-12 level. But at the same time, I don't know. It would raise the quality of play, and I think there's certain schools like San Diego State. I think they could become a great football program. Their location's amazing.
Yep.
Better than most Pac-12 schools have. So if you give them the money in the conference, they might be able to recruit and become power. UNLV is another one, being in Vegas.
Their head coach.
They have the location to become a good school. Hawaii, same thing, good location. BYU, I think, could be a good program. So I think there's definitely merit to it, and I think it'd be worth considering. And at least bringing over a few teams to make a larger Pac-12 and kind of, make the Pac-12, like you said, just have more teams there to kind of, and then you just need someone to have a big year, and then they can, pull it off getting more teams ranked and all that. So, I don't know. It could be worth it.
Yeah, because my thing is, you could just look at Boise State's history and be like, well, this is why we should have them as a part of the Pac-12. The Pac-12 could just engulf the Mountain West and do what WWE did to ECW and just say, look, your archives are a permanent part of the Pac-12, and we'll just combine it. But when people ask us, we'll call it the PC3, which I'm going to get like some type of copyright and trademark rights for that. Because seriously, like it makes too much sense. Like if Texas and the South and SEC has all this power, well, the West Coast has power too. Look at what they did with signing, the laws into effect about, okay, you can make money off your name. Now you got states trying to go to the federal level to put up lawsuits just so kids can't make money off their name.
Mm-hmm.
Gambling too.
There's huge cities on the West Coast,
and we got Vegas. What is the South?
But I'm saying,
what's the Southern equivalent of Vegas?
Atlantic City.
Who wants to go to Jersey? That's not even the South.
Yeah.
Like the West Coast literally has it set up. The East Coast, yeah. But let's be honest, there's no major football team in college football in New York. You have a Penn State, the Big Ten, and it's Ohio State. That's more middle of America. But at least with what you cover and what we've seen on the West Coast, I feel like there's no reason why it couldn't happen. In Hawaii, they have so much Polynesian talent that gets shipped all across the country. Imagine if Hawaii kept all their best players in the state.
I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, I think that there's so many good players there. I mean, Utah's a ton of good players.
Yep.
Nevada produces a ton of good players. So a lot of those Mountain West schools actually, specifically like Hawaii, San Diego State, UNLV, Boise State, and then BYU is independent, but them as well. Like those teams all have high ceilings. I don't know if the Pac-12 would want its schools like Nevada or San Jose State. Probably not Fresno State either. But if you took like the top of the Mountain West, you might have a pretty good conference.
So let me ask you this: just how did West Coast CFB.com start? Where did the idea come from? Take us a little bit through your journey to where you are now.
Yeah, so how it came to be was just there wasn't I didn't feel like the West Coast was getting covered enough in football from a national standpoint or even really regionally, and then you'd have your local, beat writer for a team, but no one's really covering the conference as a whole. So I felt like there was just an opportunity there to kind of capitalize on that and just, put out content to, fans who were looking for that. So, that's kind of how it came to be, was just trying to, finding a niche and just going for it to provide people with content that they were looking for, to be able to follow their entire conference as a whole, rather than just like, following their own individual team. Because, you go to like Sports Center, you're not really going to get much Pac-12 coverage.
Yeah.
ESPN.com, not much Pac-12 coverage. So, it's like, how do you go about following the entire conference in one place? Was kind of like my goal behind it.
And what have you learned through covering it from that conference or, bigger regional look? Like, what is it that your angle of covering it, how is that different than, like you said, the beat reporter and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think, the big thing is just, so a beat reporter, covers, the people who cover like UW or USC or Oregon, like, right, they focus on that one individual school.
Yeah.
But there's not really someone out there producing enough content to instead just cover the entire conference and how teams stack up against each other in the Pac-12 and Mountain West, and allow fans to interact. Big thing too is like what I've really learned, there's a ton of passionate fans in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
And, you can make a post about something and then fans will go on and on and on arguing in the comments about something, right? And
yeah.
It's, honestly, it's kind of provided a place for fans to just, argue with each other or just, or also get along with each other if they're from the same team. But, it's like, it kind of became like more like the community aspect to me has been the coolest thing that I've learned. It's just like, in watching is just, seeing the debates and all that go on and being able to provide an outlet for those people to kind of interact, for an Arizona State fan to, get into it with a USC fan or a UW fan with Oregon fan, rather than just going to their own little website, So it's kind of, be that one place that you can kind of just interact with everyone from your conference.
Because it's like you know, all those teams are playing each other. All those teams are competing for the same attention and eyeballs, and